Brothers are the same. Part 1. They are tall men, cleanly built and straight as the shafts of the spears they carry. And no one knows their tribal history, but there is some of Egypt in their eyes and the look of ancient Greece about their bodies. They are the Maasai. They are the color of worn copper, and with their graceful women they live on the Serengeti plain, which makes a carpet at the feet of high Kilimanjaro. In all of Africa there are today no better husbandmen of cattle. But once they were warriors, and they have not forgotten that, nor have they let tradition die. They go armed to keep well-tempered the mettle of their men. Each youth among them must, when his hour comes, prove his right to manhood. He must meet in combat the only worthy enemy his people recognize, the destroyer of their cattle, the marauding master of the plains, the lion. Thus, just before the dawning of the day in what these Maasai call the month of little rains, such a youth with such a test before him lay in the cleft of rock and watched the shadowed outlines of a deep ravine. For at least 8 of his 16 years, this youth, this young Tomas, had waited for his moment. He had dreamed of it and lived it in a dozen ways, all of them glorious. And of all the dreams, he had confronted the lion with casual courage. He had presented his spear on the charging enemy with steadiness born of brave contempt. And always he had won the swift duel with half a smile on his lips, always in his dreams. Now it was different. Now as he watched the place where the real lion lay, he had no smile. He did not fear the beast. He was sure that in his bones and in his blood and in his heart that he was not afraid. He was Maasai, and legend said that no Maasai had ever feared. Yet in his mind, Tomas now trembled. Fear of battle was a non-existent thing, but fear of failure could be real, and was. It was real and living, and kept alive by the nearness of an enemy more formidable than any lion, an enemy with the hated name of Mododo. He thought of Mododo, of that Mododo who lay not far away in the deep grass watching the same ravine, of that Mododo who, out of his hate and jealousy over a mere girl, now hoped in his heart that Tomas would flinch at the moment of his trial. That was it. That was the thing that kept the specter of failure dancing in his mind, until it already looked like truth. There were 10 youths hidden about the ravine, and they would stage and witness the coming fight. They had tracked the lion to this, his lair, and when the moment came, they would drive him, angered, upon Tomas, and then would judge his courage and his skill. Good or bad, that judgment, like a brand mark, clinging to him all of his life. But it was Mododo who would watch the closest, for a sign, a gesture, a breath of fear in Tomas. It was Mododo who would spread the word, Mododo who would surely cry coward if he could. Tomas squirmed under the heavy, unwholesome thought, and then lifted his head and pierced the dim light with his eyes. To the east, escarpment stood like a wall against the rising sun. But to the north and to the west and to the south, there were no horizons. The gray sky and the gray plain were part and counterpart, and he was himself a shadow in his cleft of rock. He was a long shadow, a lean shadow. The shuka that he wore was now bound about his waist, giving freedom to his legs and arms. His necklace and bracelets were of shining copper, drawn fine and finely spiraled, and around each of his slender ankles there was a copper chain. His long hair, bound by beaded threads, was the chaste black column that lay between his shoulders, and his ears were pierced and hung with gleaming pendants. His nose was straight, with nostrils delicately flanged, and the bones of his cheeks were high, the ridges of his jaw were hard, and his eyes were long and dark, a little brooding. He used them now to glance at his weapons, which lay beside him. A spear, a rawhide shield, these, and the short sword at his belt were his armament. He lowered his glance to the place he watched. The ravine was overgrown with a thicket of thorns, and the light had not burst through it yet. When it did, the lion within it would wake, and the moment would come. A feeling of almost hopelessness surged through him. It did not seem that he, Tomas, could in this great test prove equal to his comrades. All had passed it, all had earned the warrior's title, and none had faltered. Even Madodo, especially Madodo, had proven brave and more than ready for his cloak of manhood. Songs were sung about Madodo, and in the evenings in the manada, when the cattle drowsed and the old men drank their honey wine, the girls would gather, and the young men too, and they would chant to the heroes of their hearts. But none chanted to Tomas, not yet. Perhaps they never would, not one of them, not even... He shook his head in anger. He had not meant to think of her, of Kaligan, of soft, deep smiling eyes and red-bucked grace. Even she, so rightfully named after the star Venus, had only last night sung to Madodo, and he to her, laughing the while, as Tomas, the yet unproven, had clung to the saving shadows, letting his fury burn. She could not make up her mind between them. Must it always be first one, then the other? He saw it all with the eye of his memory, all too clearly. He saw even the sneer of Madodo on the day the elderly warrior, the chief of them all, had tendered Tomas his spear with these wise words. Now at this last weapon is your own, but it is only wood and steel and means nothing until it changes to honor or to shame within your grasps. Soon we shall know. And soon they should. But Madodo had laughed then. Madodo had said, "It seems a heavy spear, my comrade, for one so slight, a big weight for any but a man." And Tomas had made no answer. How could he, with Kaligan leaning there against the bomba, as though she heard nothing, yet denying her innocence with that quiet, ever-questing smile? At whom had she smiled? At Madodo for his needless malice, or at Tomas for his acceptance of it? He did not know. He knew only that he had walked away carrying an unstained spear, a little awkwardly, and that the joy of having it was quickly dead. Now he spat on the earth where he rested. He raised a curse against Madodo, a harsh, a bitter one, but in the midst of it he stiffened and grew tense. Suddenly he lay as still as sleep and watched only the ravine and listened as to the tone of some familiar silence. It was the silence of a waking lion. Of morning light had breached the thicket, and within his lair the lion was roused. Within his lair the lion sought wakefulness as suspicion came to him on the cool, unmoving air. Under the bars of sunlight that latticed his flanks and belly, his coat was short and shining. His mane was black and evenly grown. The muscles of his forelegs were not corded, but flat, and the muscles of his shoulders were lamented like sheaths of metal. Now he smelled men. Now, as the sunlight fell in streams upon his sorrel coat and warmed his flanks, his suspicion and then his anger came alive. He had no fear. Whatever lived, he judged by strength or lack of it, and men were puny. And yet the scent of them kindled fire in his brooding eyes and made him contemplate his massive paws.